So does Coco's performance really match the hype? Stay tuned and find out in this episode of No Fail Hydroponics. Okay, today we're going to talk about Coco. Coco, or better known as Coconut Coir. Coir is a French word. We simply refer to it as cocoa in the hydroponics industry, and that's what you'll talk about in the stores. But is it really that good? Let me give you a little background on it. 15 years ago, nobody was using it. And then some Dutch growers discovered the benefits of it, the performance that it was giving them, and it started out slow here in the United States, and it eventually took off. You'll find tons of cocoa, various kinds of it in different stores. It's everywhere. And there's a loyal following of people who swear by it. I, for one, am a big believer in cocoa. So I just want to talk about it a little bit. If you're not using it, if you are using it, maybe to get you some better results, or if you're somebody who's using something else, maybe after what I tell you today, you'll switch over to it. But let's get right down to the facts. Let's talk about some of the merits with cocoa. Cocoa is very good at retaining moisture. So it's one of those things that if you're flooding, if you're dripping, or even if you're doing a run to waste or something watering by hand, cocoa doesn't require a lot of irrigation cycles. It holds a lot of moisture, and that could be a benefit for many of you. 1 irrigation a day, 2 irrigations max, and you could be good for 2 or 3 days with cocoa. So cocoa holds a lot of moisture, and as an experienced grower, you can use that to your advantage to free you up to do other things within your garden, not simply married to having to water every day. Cocoa also has antifungal properties. It's also very resistant to algae. So a lot of you guys using rock wool will attest to the problems with your plants in rock wool. By the end of your grow cycle, they've got usually some slimy green algae, which is harmless, but fungus gnats love it. You have slimy algae growing all over your rock wool cubes. Cocoa is very resistant to that. You'll very seldom will you see any kind of mold, algae, or anything growing on cocoa. It's just a natural property to it. If you're using something else and that's a problem, switching over to cocoa, or at least giving it a try, might be an option for you. Especially if you have a problem with fungus gnats. If you just despise them, then cocoa might be a good option for you. You do have fungus gnats in cocoa, but just not so prevalent. They don't have that heavy food source that you're going to find in rock wool, especially rock wool. Another thing that you're going to find very good with cocoa is it tends to build a very dense, prolific root system. Not only will you get those big, thick structure roots, the roots that hold your plants in, give them structure and stiffness in their media, but you also find that very fine, fibrous, the very small, fibrous roots, the feeder roots, in a root system growing in cocoa. You won't find, and that was my immediate draw to cocoa, was the dense, diverse root system that it made compared to like hydroton and some of these other things we're using in flood systems. I've noticed right away with cocoa that the systems were diverse roots. You had the thick structure roots, and you had the very, very fine feeder roots as well. And I'm a firm believer, you'll hear me say this time and time again, with my experience, I have found that more roots equals more fruits. Big healthy plants with great root systems produce big healthy flowers. So I'm a firm believer in that. Along with that, the next thing, cocoa works great with other amendments. It's very versatile in how you use it. You can flood cocoa, you can drip cocoa, you can water it by hand. A lot of things you can do with it. So it's very flexible, but it also works well with like perlite. It works well with hydrogen mixed in. They'll call that chub mix. That's the common term you'll see online. And guys that are growing these big giant plants, 3, 4, 5 pound plants, single plants indoors. They're using, a lot of those guys using chub mix, which is a mix of cocoa and hydrogen. So it's very flexible and it works well with other things. You can find something called ready mix, which is cocoa and perlite already mixed together. It works great, and the added fluffiness, the added air that you get from the amendments do greatly even enhance the root system that you're going to find with cocoa. So cocoa is very versatile. So is cocoa worth all the hype? Absolutely. In my opinion, 2 thumbs up. Okay, but I want to give you something else to think about here. Here's a couple drawbacks and then something for you to mull over. Cocoa can be overwatered. So if you're a rookie and you're a little heavy-handed in your watering, ease back off of cocoa and, use a simple technique as far as just simply picking up your containers and see if they need to be watered before you add more watering and irrigation cycles. You can overwater with cocoa. And then there's something here I want to say. Cocoa has something called a low cation exchange. Without getting into all the scientific things about it, basically cocoa, the elements and the compounds in the mixture of your nutrient don't always, on a microscopic level, don't mix well with cocoa, and it tends to be more of a there's still divisive properties at a micro level. So what happens is things like larger molecules like calcium, larger elements like calcium will be flushed right out of the media. So if you're using cocoa and hydroponics, it's mandatory that you amend with calcium and use some type of CalMag product. It's just mandatory. There's no getting around it. It's inexpensive. It's a thing that we already know. So, but I'm just putting that on the table. It's part of it. CalMag's $15 for a small bottle. You use it, you get great flowers. You don't even think about it twice. So it's something to think about. But let me give you this thing about. What about peat? Some of you are going, what? Okay. Peat-based products. If you're touching and you're feeling peat, it resembles cocoa. It looks like cocoa. A lot of our soilless mixes are made out of peat. And they'll commonly go by the names of Pro Mix, Vermiculture, and if you're, depending on what part of the country you're in, or even Canada and some of these other places, peat, very similar to cocoa in a lot of ways. Look, touch, the way that it holds moisture. Even though cocoa holds a little bit more moisture, peat holds moisture very well. So why am I even bringing up peat? Well, here's the deal with peat. Peat has the same similar characteristics as cocoa, but none of the issues with calcium. So if you're looking to eliminate a process or a step or something to be concerned about, peat may be an option. And another option is mixing, peat and cocoa together. And you don't have that CalMag issue. So that's something to think about. They're both very flexible. They both can be flooded. They can be dripped. They can be hand watered, run away systems. Very, very, very comparable. And personally, I have, in the last couple of years, switched over to peat-based products. I prefer Pro Mix. And I find that I get the same performance and don't have to worry about the loss of calcium in my solution. But if you're growing America's favorite plant anyway, you know that I believe you should always amend with calcium anyway. So again, you medical cannabis growers, there's no getting around it. You can increase your yields and the prolific growth, health, and vigor in your plants by using some kind of CalMag or calcium amendment to your mix. So ultimately, they're both very high performance mediums. Both when you master them, will get your yields and your quality, knock it right out of the park. You're talking top shelf level on both of these. Pro Mix and Peat products tend to be a little cheaper these days. Coco has gone up with its popularity. The price of it has gone up. Sometimes you'll find, especially the Canna brand, $20, $22 a bag. If you don't have the jug hookup on it, $18 is the bro rate. So if you're looking for something that gives you as much performance, high level quality product, Peat or a mixture of Peat and Coco can be an option for you. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and hope that's enough to give you some ammo on whether you're going to solidify your choice to go with Coco or put something on the table, an option for you to maybe consider a Peat product or mixing the two as well. So they both work great. They're both, I give them 2 thumbs up, and you can't go wrong with either. So thank you for coming by No Fail Hydroponics today. Happy growing and stay safe out there. Please be sure to like and subscribe and contact Ape at thehydroponicape@gmail.com.